Good morning. The last 2 weeks, the Jungian community in the United States has been pleasantly surprised to find that the K-pop band BTS is about to release an album based on the book by Jungian analyst Mary Stein entitled Jung's Map of the Soul, an Introduction. The BTS album will be called Map of the Soul Persona, and it seems to be based on this book. Yesterday I was looking for BTS fans to learn more about it, and in the process I learned that not only has this BTS group focused on mental health for young people throughout their work, but there's another group called the Army Help Center, which has spontaneously arisen to be a self-help support center for young people all over the world. Obviously, where young people can't otherwise get access to a mental health professional, these volunteers are providing an important service. So this interview may seem a little funny. At the beginning, I thought I was talking to members of the BTS Army, meaning groupies of BTS. But what I found was I was actually talking to some of the leaders of AHC, the Army Help Center. So enjoy my surprise as I learn who I'm really talking to in this interview. Today we're talking about the global phenom K-pop band called BTS, and the fact that they're about to come out with a new album on April the 12th called Map of the Soul Persona. And it seems to be based on a book by Murray Stein, who is one of the most famous living Jungian analysts. Dr. Stein is now working in Zurich at the C.G. Jung Institute at Zurich, and he wrote this book in 1998, but because BTS has made an album based on this book, it now is a bestseller in Amazon. So I'm sure Dr. Stein is ecstatic about this album that's coming out. And so today I'm talking to Carla, Rupal, and Tripti, who are part of the BTS Army. And I'm interviewing them about the BTS phenomenon and what they think about it. And then we can talk about Jungian psychology and why that's significant. So the question was, who is BTS and why do you think they are important for younger generations? What are they doing that's important to you?
All right. Well, BTS is a seven-person band from Korea, South Korea, and they make all different kinds of music, but you can say it's K-pop, but it's not a genre. K-pop is an industry, and the genre is not easy to be defined, I think, in my opinion. What they do is with their songs, with their music, they are really speaking to the younger generations, I think, and they are actively trying to fight the stigma on mental health issues as well by openly speaking about it in interviews, and thus making it easier for younger people to open up about issues they might have themselves.
That's very interesting. That's extremely interesting. So the three of you are part of what has been styled the BTS Army, the BTS Army project. Tell me something about how you're drawn to this work and what you're trying to accomplish.
AHC stands for Army Help Center, and with Army Help Center we provide a service to the BTS Army by opening our private messaging program, so they can have a place to go to when they need someone to listen to them. It can be about any topic that is important to them at that moment, which can range from more or less serious topics to, you know, the typical I had a bad grade at school topics. We have several accounts which covers the whole world, and a multitude of languages available, so we provide as much help as we can in their own language. And yeah, we hope to support the BTS army in that way, and step in BTS's shoes and fight the stigma on mental health issues.
Terrific.
Hello, sir. So as a psychology student, it's like a dream, you know, it's like a work that I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So this whole AHC project, it's all about where people can come in and talk to us. It's not that we are providing professional help, but just a listening ear to them, so that whatever problems they might have, at least we provide them a listening ear so that they can discuss their problems with us, they can share with us, and we can lessen their burdens. So this is the idea of the whole project.
Oh, okay, that's the idea of your project in India, or the idea of the whole BTS Army project?
No, for the BTS AHC project, yeah.
Oh, terrific. And are you a psychologist, Rupal?
No, sir, I'm studying right now, so I'll be a psychologist.
Oh, terrific. And Carla, how about you?
I'm not. I'm just really focusing on managing this whole team of volunteers. I work in finance. But I am, I think, on one of the people on the top of the chain of volunteers. I think we have around 250 volunteers in our organization from around the world. And yeah, I think I'm kind of sort of comparable with their manager, maybe, like something like that.
Okay, and Tripti, how about you? What are you doing? Are you a psychologist?
I'm studying to be one. Like right now, I'm an undergrad psychology student. Yeah, I'm interested.
Okay. We're having it's a little hard to hear you, but we'll keep working on it. So, Carla, could you explain to me what you're doing from the top down in terms of your project, and then we'll get into some more details.
Well, the AHC organization, what we're talking about is what Rupal just said. It's an organization we have on social media in which we provide a service for BTS Army, so that they can have someone to talk to if they need to have someone to talk to, but they are not available because, and it can be about everything and anything, but we have been having conversations with people about breakups or school problems, but even things like suicidal thoughts they might be experiencing, or abuse they have been experiencing. We have all kinds of, it's a wide range of problems people want to talk about, and it's mental health care is not available in each and every country, and it's not easy to go somewhere and just talk to them. And we are anonymous, and we are not a healthcare practitioner, and we are not giving them therapy, but we do provide a listening ear. And it has grown in the past year from a few people to the 16 or 17 accounts we have right now, covering almost whole of the world, and around 250 volunteers. And we have, for each account, have another manager. And yeah, we've been just trying to let everything go smooth. We try to provide a listening ear 24/7 for each account, which is not always, we are not always able to do that because it's a lot of work, and everyone is completely volunteering to do this. Nobody gets paid for anything. So it's all from the kindness of everyone's heart that they are doing this. And that's what we've been doing with AHC. And within AHC, we started this project, the Jung project, trying to break down Jung a little bit for the BTS Army.
Okay, terrific.
Because it's not a subject for, and we can understand it. Really complex.
Yes,
so we just thought maybe we can be a sort of a bridge in between them. Yeah.
Terrific.
Between the army and Jung.
Right. Okay. Well, that's terrific, and I will be most happy to participate and see if I can help you with that. As you no doubt noticed, I have 890 videos on this topic on the YouTube channel, and so I would love to give people access to that information, which is basically the motivation, the same motivation that I went into myself, because, you know, I've never really been able to afford a true Jungian analysis because it's quite expensive. It costs about $150 an hour in the US to talk to a true Jungian analyst. But I started to read Jung 32 years ago, and it certainly has helped me right along. And Dr. Jung really became my psychotherapist in a sense, just by reading his work and by opening up my own thinking about various things that happened to me. And it's allowed me to maintain my mental balance. So, you know, because I felt strongly about that, and I've really become one of the experts on Jung's overall work. I can't say that I'm a therapist. I'm not a therapist, and I'm not a mental health professional either. But I'm a smart enough guy, I guess. I mean, I'm a lawyer and an MBA, so I have some experience, a lot of experience, as you can see from my gray hair. But I had found that it was very helpful to me, and I decided to try to teach it. And I first tried to go to universities to teach it as an adjunct professor. No one would take it on, and I didn't understand why. So I had to study a lot of things to understand why it's pushed out of university and why it's therefore ever more important that I teach the work. And so I've created my own university, basically, or my own university topic. So there's no real good place to enter Dr. Jung's work, but dive in and start swimming and hope you don't sink. But anyway, so tell me, Carla, what was your experience on Rupal and Tripti? If you have any experience whatsoever with Dr. Jung's work, could you tell me what that is?
As in the part of our curriculum, we are taught about the theories related to, the different theories that we talk about, how the therapeutic techniques they have come up with. So only after that I have studied Jung, but it's like at a superficial level that we are being taught, because it's majorly like that Freud has given a strong base for that. So people follow that. They tend to ignore the other neo-Freudians. So mostly my experience with Jung has been at a superficial level earlier, but as of now, since the album is coming out, so that has opened a new world for me, and it's a bit easy to understand Carl Jung for me in the sense because of the Eastern philosophies we are taught that are the part of the culture. So it's a bit easy to understand those topics, which other people might think that these are not scientific, or we cannot understand what he's saying, but that is it.
Terrific. Tripti, how about you?
About Jung, we haven't gone in like detail in my classes, and so we have basically studied bare basics, like who he was, about his breakup with Freud, and basics of his archetypes. But when we started like building this project for AHC, we had to get the basics down first ourselves before we started to impart the knowledge to other armies. So we found like an analogy, like in the introduction of Dr. Stein's book, there's like he compared Jung to a voyager, a sailor. So when I read that, I was like, it made it easier for me to understand Jung by that perspective. And after joining this project, I can say I'm low-key an expert in Jungian analysis. That would be so. Yeah, so that's it. Like on a college level, we have barely touched Jung, but after taking part in this project, I think, yeah, I've gained knowledge about it.
Okay, well, on the chat, in case you haven't seen it, I'm putting this channel that I'm working on, which, as I said, now has about 890 videos on it, and all of them are intended to help people understand Jung. There are 3 playlists on the channel which can bring you along somewhat. One is called JRG1, JRG2, and JRG3. Those 3 playlists are for year 1, year 2, year 3 of what I've done for the public. I also have an advanced reading group for people who know a little bit about it and are ready to get seriously into the work from a studying point of view. Obviously for the channel, I'm doing that entirely gratis as a labor of love, just as you are doing. And Carla, how about you? What was your background with Jung before?
I actually didn't have any knowledge of Jung. I have heard about him maybe in passing. Just when we learned the new album's name for BTS, I just immediately thought, well, this is something, our project, as we are with a lot of psychology students, we could play a role in, and we could mean something. And that was actually the first. And I started following some Jungian on Twitter, and actually Laura London was one of the first I spoke, and she gave us Dr. Stein's email address, and so we have been in contact with Dr. Stein himself, which is very awesome that he is just lending his time and his help to us as well. We are very grateful for that, as is Laura, and Laura did this amazing podcast. So I was just asking around for, hey, I need some tips on where to start on Jung, especially also if we are talking about a younger fan group. I know Jung is usually studied by people around their 30s for the first time. That's what I've learned. And well, we do have people in their 30s in the fandom, but a lot of them are younger.
Yes.
And yeah, so we need to, that was when I...
Right. Well, what I've learned with my work, and I've now been doing it for nearly 3 years, is that in Jung's time, it certainly was true that people didn't get to Jung until 35 or 40, about the time of the midlife crisis. But what I've found, and I think this is a function of the internet, is that young people are much more mature today than they were in Jung's time. And that's partially because of the internet. I mean, there's this famous TED Talk by an Indian gentleman, I don't recall his name right now, but he put laptops in a nook in Chennai, just left it for 2 months to see what happened with it. And when he came back, an 8-year-old Indian boy came up to him and said, "We need a faster modem." and I don't know if you know, but I've made 44 trips to India since 1994, so I know something about India and how smart the Indian people are. And so I know that people are assimilating things much faster than what was true, in my day when I was coming along. And so I think the reason Jung's idea was, in the first half of life, you're just learning how to be a human being from the time you're an infant. And it's only when you've learned and when you've done the basic function of, reproducing, let's say, and starting a family, then you can stop and figure out what you're really going to be in life. And that's why he focused on people in later life. But, some of his disciples did focus on child psychology as well. But what we're really talking about here when we talk about Map of the Soul and Mary Stein and that sort of thing is this later life perspective of understanding ourselves, for example. And Rupal, you're quite correct that Dr. Jung saw the benefits of the Hindu and Buddhist perspectives. I don't know if he got into Jainism very much, but he certainly adopted many ideas out of Hinduism. And ultimately, you have to end up with some of the work by Dr. Edward Edinger, which I'll put on the chat here, who was a late interpreter of Dr. Jung. He worked in the last half of the 20th century, and he died in 1998, sadly. But he observed that what Jung did was to penetrate through to the source of all religions, okay, all religions. And when he did that, when he achieved that, and no one else had really done it in quite the same way. There may have been some people coming along who did understand it, but they hid it. Okay, so for example, first of all religions are grand mental health schemes. Okay, that's what Dr. Jung observed. There's a famous quote which I, at the moment, can't find, but anyway, so they are grand mental health schemes, but the people who are the ministers or priests or mullahs or whatever they are of religions don't want you to know what the true secret is. The true secret is that it is a mental health scheme, and it's here. Okay, it's nowhere else. And so for someone like me, raised as a Christian, it's very hard to think about that because we're all taught heaven's up there and hell's down there and so on, and so we're entirely misdirected. So these priests and ministers and the Catholic Church and so on wanted to intermediate between God and the parishioner, and they made a profession out of it. And so anybody that was hurting their profession, they were angry with, and they fought. I'll just very briefly here share a screen for you. This is a diagram of heaven that's from a Gnostic text. And as you can see here, and Gnostics were heretics, were Christian heretics who were burned at the stake and destroyed by the Catholic Church in the 3rd century BCE. But what they realized at that time was that Eden, the Garden of Eden, is really in the psyche, okay? And so the 4 rivers here are the eye, the nose, the ear, and the mouth. And so all these sense organs take things in, and then the mouth expresses it out and explains things. So this is what the Gnostics were doing that Dr. Jung was interested in, although he gets accused of being a Gnostic, but he really wasn't that and did not see himself as that. He thought that the Gnostics had some smart ideas, but it was way more than what the Gnostics were doing. And during his lifetime, he died in 1961, there was very little known about the Gnostics except what the Catholic Church said about them, and they were the Gnostics' enemies because the Gnostics wanted to give people a direct experience of God. And Dr. Jung, the Gnostics wanted to give people a direct experience with God, and the Catholic Church wanted to have their priesthood in between God and the people. And so that's basically what a lot of wars were about. That's what the Reformation was about, and so on. And even the fact that I live in the United States today and not in Netherlands anymore is because of the 80 Years' War. And it was at that time that the Catholics in Spain were coming up to Holland every summer to beat up the Dutch and force them to come back into the Catholic Church. The Dutch very wisely would flood their country every fall after the growing season, and the Spanish would go back to sunny Spain for the winter. And this went on for 80 years until the Treaty of Westphalia. But in any case, the point is that it's all about mental health, okay? And so the significant thing, and so what Dr. Jung demonstrated through his work is that every religious statement of whatever kind and whatever religion is a statement of the psyche. It's not a statement of the physical world. And that understanding changes everything. Okay, it changes everything certainly for Christianity, but it changes everything for all religions in a way. I think that Buddhists and Hindus maybe are better at getting this than Christians are, because we're all taught that, oh, this is real and the Bible is physically a reality. The Bible is true, 100% true, but it's true as psychic facts, not as physical facts. And it may have historical facts in there that can be, but most of the events that you hear in the Bible that are miraculous, it actually explicitly says, this is a dream or this is a vision. Okay, this was a dream or this was a vision. That was the miracle. So anyway, that's, I think, a useful thing to know. And I pulled up one other thing, a couple of other things, okay. I pulled up a couple of other diagrams that I thought I should bring together for you. This is a diagram of the psyche put in his book called The Ion Lectures. Dr. Jung wrote a book called Ion, which is volume 9-2 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. Dr. Edinger, who was intermediating, trying to help people understand what Jung was talking about, was explaining ion. And so here he's given a diagram of the psyche. And so his point is, and since we're talking about map of the soul, okay, from Dr. Jung's point of view, the soul is here. Can you see my cursor moving? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So, so in a man's ego, the ego is everything you're conscious of, okay? Everything that you're conscious of is in the ego, okay? And when you're, well, before I go to that, let me stop that share. I'll bring it back in a minute, but I want to show you one other thing, which is, this is Dr. Edinger's diagram in ego and archetype. Okay, so here he's talking about the stages of the ego-self relationship and how in Jungian psychology there are two centers. There's the self and the ego. The ego is everything you're conscious of. But when you're born, you're up here. You're not conscious really of anything when you're a baby. A baby is basically a wild animal, and it needs to develop, okay, and to understand how to be a human being. That's the that's the job of a human baby. What you're seeing here on the left is basically participation mystique, so-called, which is true of primitives. Okay, primitives just live in the world like any other animal. They're not really conscious of one another. They just do what they instinctually do. And they don't really think of themselves as separate from the group, so to say. But gradually, when you're about 3 years old, you start to say I, and you start to say no. Okay, now that's the differentiation of the individual and the emergence of the ego. Okay, and that gradually comes up and gets stronger and stronger, and the stronger it is until you have an axis between the ego and what they call the self. Now, the self is also called the God image, and it's also called the greater personality. So it's very important to have a healthy relationship between your ego and yourself. And that's what's very valuable, and what Dr. Stein pointed out is very valuable in what RM said at the UN in terms of what BTS is doing, because RM was pointing out that he's still a young man, he's still learning, and so he knows that he has more to learn, and he hasn't become inflated. And of course, the risk for a rock group of any sort is that they become inflated and they think that they're God's gift to the world or whatever, and they don't understand who they are as individuals. And so many of them lose their way, go on drugs, die young, whatever it is, because they're no longer connected to reality. They become inflated. And so you want to be between the two extremes of inflation and depression. And that's how you live a balanced life. If you get inflated, then you're not connected anymore. And if you're depressed, you're also not connected anymore. And so you need this connection between the two spheres. And so now going back to my other diagram here, I hope this is helpful to you. Is this worthwhile, Carla?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So going back to this diagram, which appears in the ION lectures, this diagram is extremely helpful to understand what we're talking about, okay? So think of the ego as everything that you know, everything that you're conscious of. And so Dr. Edinger's given a woman's ego and a man's ego and a theoretically neutral ego. Now, all of these have behind them a shadow, okay? And what this refers to basically is that you have are you familiar with the Myers-Briggs type indicator? Okay, so in the Myers-Briggs, you have a dominant side and an inferior side on every scale. Okay, this is what duality is about, and that's where psychic energy is. So in every duality, and there are millions of them, the energy in your psyche goes back and forth between the two sides, right? And so in the Myers-Briggs, it's only talking about your instinctual preference for you as an individual, okay? And so if the dominant is that you're an extrovert, then your shadow side is the introvert, okay? If the dominant is you're a sensing type of person, then the inferior side is the intuitive side, right? And so it's the combination, the shadow is the combination of all these inferior sides, okay? Think of it that way. And so the shadow is not necessarily all bad, but it does include within it things that you would probably not prefer to share with others. If I had come online an hour earlier when I first read Carla's email saying we were going to have this conversation today, it would have been not pretty, okay? And so I would prefer you not to see me that way. So after I got Carla's email, I went and showered and shaved, okay, so that I can present my persona. I don't want to show you what I look like an hour earlier, right? And so that's what's in the shadow, is the hour earlier. But it's also, genuine evil and negative things in society, and these things relate also to society. So at the ego level, the consciousness level, Dr. Jung got heavily into alchemy, and alchemy is all about a cauldron, a vase, okay? It's about putting things into a cauldron. Think of making soup, okay? You're making soup, and you've got a cauldron, you're putting all your ingredients in, and then you're producing a delicious soup. So this is the cauldron for us. And so Dr. Jung was, in his alchemy work, was talking about what the contents are for everyone. Wherever you are in the world, regardless of race, color, or creed, everyone has this same soup, okay? And Dr. Jung was mainly talking about that, okay? So now we've talked about the shadow. So then we get to the soul level, okay? And this is what the BTS album is about, which is a map of the soul. But the soul for a man is anima, and the soul for a woman is animus. And so, let's see, I guess I need to bring up one other image here, just so you understand it. This is my anima, okay? Now my anima is my mother, okay? And this is my mother when she was 18 years old, a senior in high school. Obviously, she's quite lovely, and I was born about 18 months after this photo was taken. But every time I see a woman whose hair more or less matches this hairstyle and that hair color, every time I see a woman like that, I see my anima says, that's the woman for you, okay? And that's what it does. And so obviously that can get you into very serious trouble, especially if you're married. And the anima, or the animus works the same way for women. In other words, it probably relates to your father in some way. And every time you see a man who more or less fits this unconscious structure of what your animus wants in life, it's going to say that to you, right? And so Dr. Jung sometimes refers to that as the soul. Okay, so for women, the animus is the soul, and for men, it's the anima. And all of us have both in it. This word syzygy in the middle of this, it means yoked together, like two ox pulling a cart. Okay, they're both yoked to the same cart. And so all of you, although your women have an anima too, it's an inferior function probably, and all men have an animus too, and that's an inferior function probably. Okay, but obviously we have issues where some people it doesn't quite work that way. That's a different issue entirely, but there's nothing wrong with that. It just happens, and some people, these things are a little bit different how they constellate. When BTS is talking about map of the soul, they're mainly talking about this level, whether it's for men or women. And so obviously, since you're all women, you're drawn to these 7 young men, and why are you attracted to them? Well, chances are in some respects you don't even know. Okay, it's unconscious, and that's Jung's point. Okay, these things happen in the unconscious, not up here in the ego. And so this is why, if you look at old videos of Elvis Presley or the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, you see all these women in the audience and they're just screaming. And that's partially because of collective functions, okay? Because if you're in a group and everybody's doing the same thing, then you want to do it too, okay? And we have to have a collective function in our life because that connects us with our world, okay? We live collectively. All Indians are Indians, and you have to live collectively as Indians. Maybe it's not perfect the way you see your country, but that is India, okay, nonetheless. Carla may not know that on the Indian currency there are 14 languages. Every denomination of a bill is in 14 languages, but that doesn't mean it's not Indian currency. It is Indian currency, and it just addresses the many different groups that exist around India. Okay, so then this deepest level then is the self. Now, you can't tell me what you're going to be doing 2 minutes from now, okay? And I can't tell you what I'm going to be saying 2 minutes from now, because when I'm especially when I'm in a conversation like this, it is coming directly from my unconscious, and I'm just the mouthpiece for it. And most of our lives are lived in that way. The self is what tells you what to do at any given moment. And, you know, you might think about something and, oh, do I want to do so-and-so, or do I like that man, or that sort of thing. Okay, that's up in the ego. But if you suddenly make a decision that you're going to marry this man, that's yourself saying, this is the one, do this now, right? You're out of control for that. And so, in part, the self, this greater personality, this God image, is seeing the world, okay, through the lens of the animus. Think of these as contact lenses for a minute, okay? So the woman's ego sees the world, or the self sees the world through the lens of the animus and puts it up into the ego. So the self, something unconscious, is driving your interest in these BTS artists. And then it has a personal manifestation. It's all of you have seen that there can be value in providing mental health support to people who don't have access to it. That's terrific. That's amazing. That's what I'm trying to do also. I want to be a part of that. That's very interesting to me. So yourself is telling you to do whatever it is, okay, in almost all cases, unless you're up at this decision level, which is where the ego is. And the self goes back. It goes back as history. It goes back as humanity itself, all of humanity. It goes back to the beginnings of space-time and to what Jung would have called the pleroma, which is where everything is without space and time. Was that helpful at all?
It was, yes. And I want to talk maybe a little bit more about Persona, because the next album will be named Persona, and that's what we have been focusing on as well. I think, in my opinion, Persona speaks to young people as well, as we are a lot on social media.
Yes.
And I think everyone assumes a persona there as well, and maybe believes in the persona someone else is trying to convey, which might not be what reality is as well. I think that is what RM is talking about as well. I don't know if you have listened to the comeback trailer that has been out, but he has been saying, yeah, I don't know who I am. Who the hell am I, he's saying. I think it's very interesting for young people to learn about their persona, and may have different personas, because I have a different persona as I'm talking to you right now, because I am now in my role as AHC manager, AHC leader. But I had to shoo my children away a few times. I don't know if you've noticed, but that's another role I have. You know, I have
Surely.
another persona as a mother as well, and so I think that's especially interesting for younger people to learn more about that.
Surely. Personas can be put on and off. I'll give you an example of my persona because it might be interesting or useful. In my primary types, I am not what one would call a picture book U.S. Marine. But when I put my uniform on, then I can play this persona. In the Myers-Briggs types, about 95% of all generals and admirals in the military are STJ. Okay, those three. They may be introverts or extroverts, but they're STJ. And I am NTP, so I'm opposite two of those in terms of my prominent archetype, my prominent type. But when I put my uniform on, as here, then I project a persona that's STJ. Okay, and not only do I project it as a mask, I actually behave that way too, because I'm trained to behave that way. And so even though those aren't my primary type preferences, I actually behave that way if I put my uniform on. And so that's one idea about the persona, that you can actually put a different persona on in a different occasion, on a different occasion. And then I'll just share one other picture with you because it shows what happens when your persona gets hurt. Somehow your persona gets shaken in some way. So here is a self-portrait from a photograph that was taken in 1970. I was in a battle in Vietnam, and this was my reaction. And actually, this contains everything that I have to say about the Vietnam War is in this photograph. But here you can see that the very cocky, strong persona of the Marine Corps officer is definitely challenged here. And so I think you can see what I mean by that without us really going into it in detail. And so sometimes our personas are shaken, and sometimes that does mean that that's a time when we need to talk to somebody. We're often not very good about that. I mean, we obviously in the military we have lots of issues of people coming back from battle and they have PTSD, but the same thing happens to women who've been abused in a family situation. They have PTSD also. One of the ways to deal with PTSD is to talk to somebody about it and have someone understand how you were, and you can't make that go away. Okay, as Dr. Jung pointed out, some things you never get over, but you grow out of them. You can grow out of them so that you can take that piece that's in your psyche and put it in a corner, and you say, okay, I know that that's there, and then I can deal with it. And so, for example, in my case, but I had to work all this out for myself because nobody ever told me this, so it might be wrong, but in any case, I do have very, very minor PTSD, but it's triggered by two things. It's triggered by fireworks on the 4th of July or at any sort of celebration where there's fireworks, and it's triggered when a helicopter flies over. And so in both of those situations, it immediately puts me back in Vietnam. And I didn't understand this at all when I was young, but I came back from Vietnam, and the first time that we had a 4th of July celebration after that, I was out on a boat in the Niagara River watching fireworks, and suddenly the fireworks started, and boy, I almost jumped off the boat. I was so upset by it. I didn't understand it, but then I've learned over the years that that's what triggers me, that the fireworks themselves and the explosions from the fireworks is what's putting me back into Vietnam and giving me that flashback. And by the same token, the helicopters flying over, because there were so many helicopters about during the Vietnam War, that triggers me again. And so people, when they have PTSD, you can't get rid of it. I mean, I don't expect that to leave my mind for the rest of my life, but at least now I recognize it. I know it's a trigger, and I have ways that I can work out of my own psyche about how to deal with it. And so, as I say, it happens very often with women who are in abusive situations and various other things. I'm going to do a video hopefully later today, which is going to be from this book, Psychological Types by C.G. Jung. It's a big book, but in the back of it, Dr. Jung gave a definition of individuation. And I think that's the most important facet of what's happened with the BTS group, which is individuation is something, and by individuation we're not talking about individuality. And I'll talk about this in this video I'll do later today, so it'll be on the front page of the YouTube channel later on today. But in individuation, in this definition, which is only a page and a half long, there are 10 different things that happen when someone individuates, and typically those things weren't happening. In Jung's time, those things weren't happening until people were 35 or 40 years old, when they hit their midlife crisis. But what's very interesting in the case of BTS, and it's very clearly evident by RM's talk to the UN, is that they have, or at least he has, obviously I haven't heard the album yet, I haven't heard any of the other young men, but in his case, he definitely has fully individuated. And that's a very important idea about why these guys are so popular, and because he is extremely mature, way more mature than most people, than most young people. And so I really respect what he's done, and the fact that he's done this map of soul, and I saw the chalkboard where he had mapped it all out. It's quite interesting what he did. It's phenomenal, and it's going to make people really want to understand Jungian psychology, and so I'm certainly happy to help people. And if you want to work out a time that we could talk about more issues, I'd be happy to do that. So how was your project put together, Carla? How did you get going in terms of offering people a sensitive ear?
The whole AHC project, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it started, I think, a little bit over a year ago, when the girl who started it, she saw, well, what we do in culture is that we have to vote for the band we are a fan of on social media a lot, in order for them to win certain prizes, and it's fan voted, and it can be very stressful for people. They read messages, oh, you have to do this, you have to vote, you have to do this, we need them to win. If you're not voting, you're not a fan. Messages like that are being sent out into the world. Some people shrug that off and think, okay, you don't tell me what to do, I do what I want to do. But some people are obviously more receptive to those messages, and it caused stress to some people, and we saw more and more messages of people being stressed about it. And the girl who started it, she said, well, we want to offer them an ear, if they need someone to talk to, because we've seen that a lot of people say that on social media, hey, if you ever need someone to talk to, you can send me a private message and we can talk to each other. But she wanted to do this on a bigger scale, and that's where we all got involved, and it steadily grew from that. It was just one Twitter account, but it exploded actually in the sort of message we got, and our systems couldn't handle it, so new accounts had to be started. We had, I think the first 2 new accounts was a Spanish account and an Indonesian account, and then gradually we got a rush.
Okay,
account
I'm losing
for Army who needs someone to talk to.
Right. Okay. So Carla, this is not explicit. Yeah, it wasn't good for about a minute there, but so this is not explicitly about BTS per se. Is that what you're saying?
No, it is. I think you have to have a sort of the one thing that's the common denominator for us is that we are all fan of BTS.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter where you come from or how old you are or what your gender is or your religion. The one thing we all have in common is that we are a fan of this group. So we always have at least that to talk about. And it's a good topic starter to talk about with someone. So, hey, you are a fan as well. I am a fan as well. Who is your favorite within the group? And you can start on an informal way, and then you can slowly get deeper to the point as to why they wanted to just talk to you. Because most of the time, it's not to talk about who their favorite out of the 7 is. It's just they have something they want to get off their chest, and some people get to the point immediately, and others need to work up to it for a little bit. So it's good to have a target group, and our target group is fans of BTS. Although if you are a fan of another band, we won't reject you if you come to us. But you're welcome to come and talk to us. But yeah, it's there are 18 million only on Twitter, fans of BTS. So I think we got our.
You have a large enough group to draw from.
So, yeah.
Okay, that's good to understand, and obviously I've been self-motivated to do the same sort of thing, and I've done it based on focusing on Dr. Jung's work, but I'm certainly interested in figuring out how I can interact and help you with that. Dr. Jung's work is the collected works are 20 volumes, and I'm told that there are about 100,000 letters that have not yet been published. You have to understand that during Jung's time there was no email, so every time he wanted to say anything to someone he had to write him a letter, and so there are approximately 100,000 that have not been published yet. And so there's still a lot of his work still to go because he was writing all of his life. And some of it is quite difficult to understand. For example, the so-called Red Book, the Red Book, which you may have heard of. Have you heard of it? Do you know of the Red Book?
Heard of it.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It has been published recently only in, I think, 2009 itself.
Yes, but the Red Book can be very confusing if somebody comes to it first. It's not the place to start with Jungian psychology because the Red Book is Dr. Jung recounting his personal experiences with his own visioning experience. For Hindus, in the Bhagavad Gita, there is the story of Krishna and Arjuna in going into battle, right? And that was a vision that Arjuna had of Krishna that helped him win that battle. I don't know whether Hindus would understand that as a vision or not, but that's how Dr. Edinger has talked about it. Let's see, I have a couple of lectures by Dr. Edinger that really put a lot of these things together, so let me give you the links to those, because he talks about experiences with a greater personality and what that is like. And so let me give you the links here. This is a psychological experience that many people don't understand. They think that they're going crazy, but we all have them, we just don't recognize them. So here's a second one that is about individuation, which is what I'm going to do the video about later today. Then I'm going to give you a link to an interview that Dr. Edinger did. If you go through these two lectures and one interview, I actually transcribe them so that you can read them and understand them. They're very powerful, and they help give you a focus in terms of where Dr. Jung's work is. The map of the soul, which Mary Stein did, is, you know, this one area that we were talking about, but Jung's work is very complicated. So this would give you kind of an overview of what Jung was talking about if you look at those three links. I run a weekly meeting for people, which may be difficult if you're in India, which is on Monday evenings at 8 p.m. my time, which current Indian time, that would be 5:30 in the morning, unfortunately. But for Carla in Netherlands, it would be even worse, 1:30 in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning. But I record those, and so they're all on these playlists that I gave you, going back all the way. There have been 120 sessions now. And so if you start in JRG1 and go through, you can bring yourself along as you wish. And I'm certainly happy to help you with that. Tell me, when did BTS emerge as an international phenomenon, such that you would notice them in India, RuPaul and Tripti, and Carla, when you would notice them? When did it happen?
To be very honest, for India, it's not like that they have entered the mainstream till now. I heard about them in 2017 through Tripti, of course. Mm-hmm. So that was the time that I came to know about them, and at that particular time, no one knew about them. No one was interested in K-pop. So I believe internationally, when they came to it, it was about in 2017 when they got the BBMAs, the social, the award for that. So that was I think the main thing. But because of an award, I don't think that people will acknowledge them. So maybe it was when they performed at the AMAs, that was a striking point for them, that these are the guys, they sing well, they are good looking, they have, they have on-point choreography. So I think that is the most that attracted the general public, might be. So that is, yeah.
Okay, terrific. And did you have thoughts about that, Carla, from a European point of view?
Well, I don't think they're really mainstream here as well. I don't hear them on the radio in the Netherlands at all. I do think there is a lot of work for them to be played as Korean singing group to be played on the European radio. Of course, they have been doing great promotional-wise, going to major talk shows, which are also shown here in the Netherlands, which might cause them to be a little bit more mainstream. But I do think they have a long way to go as to being regularly played on the radio, which what I would say will define mainstream.
Okay, that's interesting to know. Because of the Map of the Soul Persona album, we Jungians are becoming aware of them in the last month. Okay, I'm not, because my hearing is going at my age, I don't spend a lot of time listening to popular music these days. A psychotherapist that I know, who happens to have adopted Korean children.
I know who you're talking about. I have been speaking to her as well. It's Martha, right?
Yes, Martha. Yes, and so she drew my attention to it, and then I started to find it with Laura and Jungian Laura, and so on.
Yeah, they did inspire us in a way, I think, with them being vocal about mental health. I think it does, maybe on a subconscious level, it did inspire us to make steps in that as well. To just don't be the passive bystander and see it happen, but to take action and to actively try and do something about it. So I don't know. I think it's a combination of both. I think.
Well, I think your project is very, very interesting. But when we started this interview, I thought it was about like a fan club or something. I didn't realize that you had this mental health direction that you had been doing before BTS came along. So I'm very impressed by that, actually, and I think it's a wonderful thing that you're doing. And anything I can do to help, I'd be happy to do so. Obviously, Dr. Jung's work is very complicated and very deep. Okay, we know almost nothing about the psyche. Okay, our own psyches. Most people don't know anything about it, and things do happen. And I've had a number of visions in my lifetime, but until I started to study Jung in depth, I didn't know what was happening. In 1993, I had been reading Jung for 6 years at that point, and I read a book called Women Who Run with the Wolves, and it's by a Jungian analyst named Clarissa Pinkola, Estés. And at the same time, I was thinking about writing a novel, and I decided to write a novel about a young Japanese woman, because I have a lot of experience in Japan, a young Japanese woman who comes off of a farm to earn her dowry in Tokyo, and who ultimately 60 years or 30 years later becomes the first woman prime minister of Japan. And what is her life like from the time she left the farm to the time she became prime minister? But because I'm a man, I didn't really know how to describe this from a woman's point of view, but Dr. Estés put a 9-step process in her book that women have to pass through in order to get their intuition going. Women are known to be intuitive, and so I decided to use that as a kind of recipe in my book. And so I started to write the book, and within 2 days I began having visions, and in the very Jungian sense, and the book literally wrote itself. I put my hand on the keyboard, and these visions would just come, and my ego took no part in it. It was entirely coming from myself. And I really did not know what to do with that. And so I put it in a drawer for 21 years, actually. Then I read the Red Book, and I saw that Dr. Jung had had these visioning experiences. Mine went for 8 months. His went for 5 years. But he had the advantage of being a psychiatrist when it started to happen to him, and so he knew how to handle it from a psychiatric point of view. I thought I was doing it like a novelist does, and I still think that that's true, that I think excellent novelists, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and all the famous ones, connected to that part of the psyche, and their novels came from the self in that way. But some artists lose that connection. That's a connection between the self and the ego. They lose that connection, and so we would call that writer's block, perhaps, or artistic block. And and then people go into drugs or alcohol or something like that as a way to get that back. And that's not a very good way to do it. But in any case, you know, from my own personal experience, I knew that that's what happens and happened. And so I do know that, you know, there are many emotional events that can happen that can generate a vision or a dream. Another one was 21 years ago. My daughter had been involved with fundamentalist Christians, and I took her out for dinner on her 22nd birthday. And at the end of that evening, which was a lovely evening, we had been talking about our time in Japan together and traveling through Europe together and so on. But at the end of that evening, she says to me, "Dad, well, I'm sorry to say this to you, but I think you're going to hell." And at that moment, I dropped into hell. And on the car ride back from that dinner to my home in Annapolis, which is a 35-mile distance, I had a vision of Mephistopheles dropping into the seat next to me in the car. I'm going 65 miles an hour, and I had this vision of Mephistopheles as I imagined him in Faustus, when I read Faust, sitting next to me. And so I cut in the Faustian bargain, which was I said he could have my immortal soul on my death, provided none of my daughters would think that of me for the rest of my life. And he disappeared. Okay, and I've been criticized by some of my subscribers that I cut too cheap a deal for my immortal soul. But what I knew was that this was a psychogenic vision, and fortunately, because I'd been studying Jung for 10 years at that time, so I knew that it was a psychogenic vision, but it was very much real. And it took me another 10 years after that before I fully integrated that and understood that vision. And so what I'm saying to you as people that are trying to help young people, they can have this kind of vision or this kind of dream, and these things are very real, and we very much don't understand them well. I mean, some people do, obviously Jungian analysts do, but most psychotherapists do not, because they follow the materialistic drug solution to problems, like getting people out of depression by drugging them. Well, you know, that's all well and good, but it doesn't solve the underlying problem. And so this is why Jungian psychology is very important, because if you can bring these things up into consciousness, then you can integrate them and understand them in your own life and understand where they fit in terms of your life and your society and what you're doing now, that sort of thing. Rupal, does that ring true to you at all? Or Tripti?
Yes, sir, I feel that as in when we are talking to someone, as in my personal experience, that, you know, in psychology only we are dominated by fields such as CBT or, you know, humanistic. Not actually at this particular time, it's all CBT, you know. So we are taught about the thought patterns and, you know, at the superficial level, you treat the person at the superficial level. It's not about how that thing originated. So I personally feel that the Indian psychology or the Jungian psychology, these both can integrate together and help the person much, much better.
I agree. Okay, Carla, did you have further thought on that?
Well, I do think that personally, I believe, have always believed, even before I knew of Jung, that just by prescribing drugs, you won't solve the problem. You always have to go and try and find out what the deeper issue is here. But that's just me speaking from a personal experience with friends who had issues with their mental health. So that's always been, for me, the most logical thing ever. To be honest, like how yeah, I cannot understand that there are people who think, hey, just by drugs itself. I won't say it's not helping. It might be, but it's not the solution in itself. I think it's a means to an end.
I want to draw your attention to one other writer she's a woman analyst, and her name is Belford Ulanov. She is now emerita professor of psychology or psychiatry and religion at Union Theological Seminary, which is an American Protestant theological seminary. She's a professional psychiatrist as well as a Jungian analyst and as well as a teacher of religion. One of the things that she wrote about is the psychoid layer, and I'll just put that on here so you can see, because I think that what happens when you have a conversation with someone, and it's happening during this conversation, in fact, is that you open up a layer to the unconscious, and it allows things to find their own level, let's say. And her point is that if you open up that layer, then people tend to be able to self-adjust, but if you don't, you won't. Okay. And so anyway, she has a book on that topic. I did a couple of videos about it, so you could, on my YouTube channel, you could put those words into the search and probably find those videos right away. I don't have them handy right now. The thumbnail on that video is also useful because it shows two circles. Okay, it shows two dots and a circle around one of the dots, and then a larger circle that's around both dots, and it has with it a little poem that says, you drew a circle that drew me out. I drew a circle that drew you in. And I've always remembered that. It was quite meaningful to me because it was on a poster at the family court in Rochester, New York, about 40 years ago. I think that that's a lot of what you're trying to do in terms of offering listening, because people often draw people that are in their immediate family out, okay, because they don't want to talk about it to their mom or their spouse or whatever it is. But by you offering to listen, then you're drawing a circle that draws them in and includes you, okay? And so by caring and by showing that you're caring, that is very important for mental health in my view. But anyway, I just share that with you to the extent that's useful. Carla, maybe you should do an intro to AHC again that I could put at the beginning of this interview as something that would be more clear, because when I began this interview, I thought we were talking about a BTS fan club. Okay, I didn't. Well, pardon?
Yeah, well, that's partially it's true. We are BTS fans, and we are providing, but we're also a fan of BTS Army. We can explain it like that maybe a bit more. We don't just want our favorite group to do well. We want their supporters to do well as well.
Right. Okay. So could you in a paragraph just say what HC is and how you're helping BTS army.
Okay.
Thank you very much for coming on, Tripti and Rupal and Carla. Are there any other things that you'd like to talk to me about? I'm certainly available to discuss Dr. Jung's work at any time on any part of it.
Thank you very much for having us. It's been very informative for us, and we've learned a lot. I think, if I speak for myself, I've learned a lot, and I think it's very informative, and I'm glad we did this.